spouses. And thank you for all of the spouses joining us right now and all of the viewers. We're thrilled to have you joining in from around the world to be with the USO and our featured guest, Noel. How are you doing?
Doing great. Good to be
Noel,
here.
you're on mute.
Oh,
There you go. Oh, wait, you're there. You're
am I
there.
good?
Okay. Yes. No, I'm like, wait a
Great to be
second.
with you.
We want to hear you talk. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good,
Yeah.
good, good. Well, we want to hear a little bit about how you're connected to the USO, and we absolutely want to hear about you and Stronger Families. And so, like, let's get started there, and we'll
Yeah.
dive into a great conversation.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. So, Strong Families, we've been partnering with USO for 8 years. Which,
Wow.
it's just amazing. Such a long history, and it's been incredible in that time. We've served over 25,000 couples through the programming that we've been doing, and continue to navigate these interesting waters ahead of us in terms of COVID and all that's going on in the world. So, but yeah, it's been a real honor to partner and just see the lives transform. So excited to be here and
Yeah.
sharing.
Yeah, we're thrilled to have you. And you said 25,000 couples?
Yeah,
That's
military
great.
couples.
Okay, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, and where are you joining in from today?
Yeah, I thought I'd make sure that I brought the right elements of Seattle, which it's raining today, of all things. We've had sun, but right now I should say it's misting. But yes, from Seattle.
Okay, excellent. And if the spouses who are joining us live right now, if you want to chime in the chat box and let us know where you're joining in from today, we would greatly appreciate it so we all can see where you're located around the world. And I'm joining you from Williamsburg, Virginia. So it's sunny here today. So I do appreciate a good rain though. So I think I'd like the Seattle area. How long have you lived in Seattle? Are you from that area or?
Yeah, so we've been here 12 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so it feels like home for sure. Kind of the West Coast has been the main areas that our family's been a part of, but I keep saying that keep moving north. Hopefully it's not Alaska. Seattle's kind of the final stop here.
I love it. When you were talking about your family, tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been married for 16 years, and my wife and I, we have a total of four. A kind of unique story. We had three boys, all kind of 2 years apart, and we were at the place a couple of years ago. We were like, you know what, we're good. Like, there's tons of testosterone running through our family. The conversation was more around like, do we get a puppy to add to the mix?
Great.
And we decided, nope, we're done. And so I actually scheduled an appointment with a guy named Dr. Snip. I kid you not, that is his name. He's a doctor. And between doing that and Valentine's Day, my wife's like, I have a special announcement. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, did you get a puppy? Like, we haven't even talked about that.
Yeah.
I've upgraded. We're having a baby. So we rounded out the final addition to our family, a baby girl. And oh my gosh, total joy. Truly amazing. So yeah, but the best part about that story, I got to tell you, is my youngest son, who was like the biggest proponent for the puppy.
Yes.
He hears baby girl and he goes, that's cool. But when are we getting the puppy? It was like, you didn't miss a beat. It was like, okay, when are we getting the puppy?
Well, two questions then. You didn't let the boys name the baby girl, did you? Because she'd probably end up with a name like Bingo or something.
No, Nicole, that's so funny you should say that. It was brought up, but no, we nixed that one. And it was, yeah, the conversation's still happening though. There's no puppy.
Okay.
It's, if anyone has a rent a dog situation, I'm totally game for that. But yeah.
Oh my goodness, I love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. And so what are you guys doing in the area right now to keep busy since you have 4 kids?
Yeah.
What are you guys up to?
Yeah, I think this has been an interesting time. Certainly school just got out. So prior to that, there was a lot of managing school remotely, like almost this homeschooling environment that we were in. And I know for my wife, that was like uncharted territory. And then you have like this little one who's in the mix of it, getting into everything.
Yes.
So for us, I think it's been really kind of going after intentionality has been the big thing. Like, well, right now, let me start with that question. There's been a real emphasis for us to say, hey, how do we get outside and do things together as a family? That's been a big one, just because I think, we get sucked into that vortex of virtual. Yeah. And so our kids especially, it's like default to tech. And so we've been like, hey, how do we get out there and do stuff? So, and then the other thing has been, just I think kind of hands-on projects.
Yeah.
So with our three boys, we took on the inspiring dream of building a skate deck ramp for our
Oh,
cul-de-sac. I've never done anything like it. Pulled up YouTube, and the next thing you know, we have this like half pipe thing that's happening. So that's been really cool. I mean, I think just finding quality time where they're using their hands and all that kind of stuff has been a huge part of keeping them busy.
yeah. Well, and all hands on deck. I like that, how everybody can kind of contribute to something. But just trying to really get outside during this time is so important. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that my wife probably said it best. Is she's like, we need to be thinking about what's happening on the mind front, and then kind of that physical hands, and then the heart aspect of it. And so we've actually asked them to come up with this summer, like what's something they're going to do from a generosity, give back. We're really big on this idea of investor versus consumer
okay.
with our kids, and I think too many kids are just consuming. They're constantly consuming, and yet, like if we start to look at it through the perspective of investing, like how are they going to invest? And that might, I mean, that could look a lot of different ways. So we've actually tasked them and said, hey, why don't you guys come up with a way that you can invest in, your friends or in your family or your community, something along those lines.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, well, thank you for that because I'm definitely going to use that. And I'm sure some military spouses out there are probably nodding their heads saying, yes, yes. So perfect. And let's go back to the couples then that you served. You said 25,000 military couples.
Yeah.
What are some common themes that you've seen working with military couples throughout the year,
Yeah.
couple years?
Well, I think, let me speak to the environment that I'm seeing right now, because I think
Okay.
it's unique and it's not the norm. I think there's certainly an element of virtual fatigue. We're seeing that in a significant way. No one really, it's like, oh, another Zoom meeting, yay. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
that aspect of it, I think is difficult. But there's also this unique environment that I see a lot of couples in where, because of the situation of quarantine and just, not being able to go out as much and all that, the exasperation of issues and also strengths are happening. So what I mean by that is like, for the couples who are struggling before they came into this environment, like it's exasperating. It's actually, they're struggling even more so based on just what's going on in the interactions. For those who are doing well and they're like, they're in a good place, I think this has actually helped them grow even more close and
Yeah.
greater connection. So in many ways, I think, this interesting landscape that we're in right now is creating a scenario where, unfortunately, they're really struggling. Like this is becoming a much deeper issue, and others are like, man, we're like date night every night. You know what I mean? Like we're totally taking advantage of this time where it's just the two of us. We're both working from home and all those kind of things, creating that connection.
Well, and it will be interesting to see where the ones that are doing so well with all the togetherness and everything like that, once another new normal comes about,
Yeah.
then, it was people start going to offices or not working remotely so much, what that will look like, because it's like you were helping so much at home and now you're not here. Like, where's my help? I want my help back. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing I would just add to that, I think the resiliency of military couples is unique in the sense that many of them have gone through, deployments and,
Yeah.
the new routines that have to be adapted to because of just the pace of the military. I think a lot of couples I've seen that's a strength that they're bringing to this time because
Right.
they're able to make that, adapt quickly, create new routines, which is it's just a great thing,
Yeah.
on many levels. So.
Yeah, I've had a lot of talks with girlfriends, and we mentioned the resilient thing. This is, something that we're all able to say, okay, we can do this. We'll overcome this somehow. So
Yeah.
definitely. Well, and I do want to real quick call out that we're wearing the same shirt, and that just didn't happen overnight. These are actually July is our T-shirt campaign month, and what you can do if you're interested in getting a T-shirt, we call them the official uniform of a military supporter, and you just go to the website uso.org/T-shirt and make a donation of $29, and you'll get this T-shirt. So just wanted to throw that out there. I was like, well, look at us, we're pretty cool
And,
today with our.
and I will say this is a very comfy T-shirt.
I
Not
know.
all T-shirts are the same.
Yeah, right? People are like, why are they wearing the same thing? So thank you for supporting the USO.
Sure.
But Let's jump into with these events, the Coffee Connection events. Military spouses we have found absolutely love to network with each other in the live environment. So for the military spouses joining us right now, if you want to share your LinkedIn profile in the chat box, it's a great way to just make friends instantly and check each other out and get to know each other virtually in another setting. So please feel free to share your LinkedIn profiles in the chat box, and hope you guys can make some connections today. But no, I'm going to jump back into marriage
Yeah.
and get to some questions here. So can you tell us about the different types of stages military couples go through from the time they get into the military all the way through transitioning out? Because I know you mentioned before on a previous discussion that there are these different types of stages. So can you go into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's, when you talk about the life cycle of, your career in the military, there's some very defined stages that happen at that level. And then I think, right now there's the PCS season that we're in, and there's some defined stages that are happening on that front. So maybe I'll start with the bigger career view of it.
Sure.
What I've seen with couples is that anticipation is the first phase. Like, man, we're excited about this new opportunity. We're going to be joining, we're going to serve our country. Like, there's a lot of anticipation. I would say it's the first phase. And then it kind of moves into elevated emotions, right? And that can be both in a really good way and a really difficult way, depending on what that, and it's going to be unique to each couple and their journey. But what we've seen is that the elevated emotion sometimes can be, and this is exactly what this fits me. This is who I am. This is my identity. They kind of put that on, right?
Yeah.
For others, it's not what they expected. And so there's this detachment and withdrawal that takes place in that next phase that can be really challenging. You see that, just the expectations aren't being met necessarily. And so there's an element of like, hey, elevated emotions, which impact the relationship in a significant way. Anytime you have emotions in a relationship, in a marriage, you're going to deal with challenges, communication challenges, conflict, those kind of things. And then I think from that, the next stage that many military couples move into is new routines. Like, you have to adapt to that. These elevated emotions create new routines, which are really, that's the backbone. I see so many couples, whether it's deployment or coming home from deployment, they have these routines that they are conditioned to move into and to create resiliency in many ways, right? And then from that, I think, and we get a chance to work with a lot of leadership, I would say it's the homecoming phase. Like, they know they're in the final stretch. They really understand, like, how do we make this work together as a couple? We've gone through several deployments, all that kind of stuff. And then, so I've seen those stages play out. And I think at each one of those stages, it's unique to the challenges and opportunities for every couple as they're going through that, which I'd love to unpack that too. But let me talk about PCS, because I think that's really near and dear to many right now that they're going through it. We have a class that we do on transition, and it's not your typical transition class like, hey, what does it look like for a career outside the military, or, financial aspect of it. But really, it's focused on you as a couple, like your transition. And that word transition, we think of it as being one phase, but it's really not. You think about PCS right now. Oftentimes there's an ending point, right? Where, like, hey, we have new orders. We're having to move to a new community. That ending can oftentimes be a lot of sadness, right? It's like, man, I'm having to pick up, or maybe it's excitement. Not sure what it is, right? But that ending is the first phase, moves into what we call the neutral zone. And it's kind of that space where you're like, okay, I'm packing things up. I'm not sure, we haven't arrived yet, so I don't really know what that's going to look like. But so often it's kind of that place where you're waiting, trying to figure out what the next step's going to be. And I think what gets missed in that neutral zone is this idea of potentially even needing to grieve the loss, right? Of what that normal was for you. And then the final thing is the new beginning. Like, you're launching into a new community, you have new order, new unit. So those are kind of the, I would say, phases that I've seen couples navigate when it comes to PCSing and going through that together.
I feel like so many of those I can relate to, and we've been in for 11 years, but it's just, and I mean, is it normal to kind of go through different stages and then revisit like the beginning one again? And then,
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of
yeah,
like a cycle. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I think the thing that I've seen couples, and one of the things that we really encourage during that time of transition, whether you're talking about PCS or just the lifetime in the military career, is that every single one of us have unique strengths
Yeah.
that we bring to the relationship, to the family. And we've actually done this. It's been such a cool exercise, Nicole, where we'll have them write down like 5 strengths that they believe they have within them. Or if they can't think of 5, they're like, man, I don't really know. We actually have a list of like different words that are, create strengths. For those who are on the interview with us, even asking people around you that are close to you, like, what are 5 strengths? When you think about me, what are 5 strengths that you would kind of just like, yeah, that's what comes to mind. And it's been really cool because when we were able to meet in person, we'd have, a couple hundred people standing up, and we would take one person and read off their 5 strengths and say, if anyone else has those same 5 strengths, stay standing. And what always happens is everyone sits down,
Yeah.
because those unique strengths are to us. And what the beauty of that is that those strengths, they play out in that transition. Like, you think about how those strengths have helped you in the past, and then applying to what you're going through right now, that can be a real game changer in terms of using that strength during the transition to lean upon in your relationship. So yeah,
I love that. I'm
yeah,
going to try that out. I'm going to try that in a virtual setting somehow.
there we go.
So cool. Well, and you talked about strengths and finding strengths in marriages. How, in the exercise that you did, but how can we sit down with our spouse and maybe do that just together? I mean, and can that be, at the kitchen table, and how do we get that conversation started? It sounds pretty simple, but
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's part of this is looking at in transition, almost like I use the analogy of a wheel of a spoke, or the spokes of a wheel, right? You have like different spokes on a wheel where you're thinking about, there's finance that could be on that spoke. There's wellness, there's romantic relationship, there's, community. Those all represent the wheel on the spoke. And for each one of those, kind of where do you fall as a couple? Like, how are we doing on a scale of 1 to 10? Kind of plot that together, saying, you know what, when it comes to community, and I feel like I'm 2 because this is brand new. I don't know anyone, right?
Yeah.
Where potentially the spouse who is active duty, they're like, it's a 9 because I have a unit that I'm going to, and I have relationship now. And so that gap there oftentimes is where the challenges exist for any relationship. And then how do you begin to move closer together, right? It's not necessarily they're coming from a 9 down to a 5 to meet you there, but it's how is that spouse who's feeling like, man, I just don't have that community anymore. How are they beginning to put together an action plan to get closer to feeling like, man, I've got a circle of friends, and I have connections, and it's not like I'm isolated when my spouse is going off to work and they already have those connections. I think that's a very real thing in this PCS season that we hear over and over again from spouses.
I mean, it's very interesting that you say that, because we're hearing that on our end too, just the isolation and the connections are so hard to make, especially now. So just, yeah, what does that look like? And I like to just sit down and kind of reevaluate that and let your spouse know where you're at. So, because they might not know, they might think you're at, that they're at a 9, but they think that you're at a 9 too. So it's just fine, but you could be at a 2. So I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so another hot topic within the military couples, communication. We've talked about this before, but how can we find a way to connect as a couple with increasing our communication skills?
Yeah, I love it. This is huge. This is like the backbone of any great relationship. When you look at a couple and how they're doing, oftentimes it's predicated on their communication and how well they're doing. And I like to package this with conflict. Communication, conflict kind of go hand in hand. When communication's great, conflict is usually not going to be a huge issue, right? When communication's breaking down, usually you're going to see more conflict. And The thing that for my wife and I think this has been such a huge piece is to understand this idea of like, what's the original emotion that we're feeling right now? Like for a moment, everyone that's on the call, just think about the last argument that you had with your spouse, right? Go back to that place for a moment. And if you think about it, oftentimes what comes up as that initial emotion is like anger, I'm resentful, whatever that might be, right? Fill in the blank. But the original emotion is this idea that it's generally not about anger. Like if I think about the last conflict that I was in, it was this idea that, either it's fear, frustration, hurt, or injustice. Something's happened that's a deeper emotion that's going on. And so often our communication, we try to have it at the level of the argument, right? The anger. But when reality, we need to be talking about, man, I feel hurt. That's a whole different level of communication that begins to take place for couples. And I've seen that those who can tap into that place of like, yeah, the original emotion for me was there's fear. That's really what's driving this. And if we can talk about fear, oh my gosh, that's a whole different level of communication now with my spouse. Then, I'm really upset with you because of whatever it might be that you did. That's the surface level. The deeper issues down here. So for us, we've just found taking that pause for a moment and tapping into like, what's that original emotion? That really helps guide the communication on a different level than generally what ends up happening for couples. So that's one thing. And then I think the other thing I would add to that is empathy. Like, how quickly can we get to that place of sharing empathy with our partner, which literally means, are we willing to step into their shoes for a moment, to feel what they're feeling, to understand maybe what they're going through on that level. Again, communication is going to happen at a different place than if we're just staying at the surface level issues in our relationship.
Well, you mentioned empathy, and I'm glad that you're here because I'm gonna just throw it out there. How do we, as a female spouse going to a male spouse, how do we get into your brain to figure out what you're thinking? Because how can we get to that empathy if you're like, I'm just mad. I'm angry. And it's like, give us more.
Yeah. Come on, open up.
Yeah, right. How do we do that?
Yeah, the mind reading thing rarely works. You might get one shot there that, you connect and you're like, yep, okay, that's exactly what I was thinking. But I really think that when it comes to tapping into, if you want to use the analogy of the male brain, there's an element of that. I think really it's about seeking to understand, right? And it's asking questions rather than supposing that what they're feeling or they're thinking, right? And then there's nothing else that would shut down a guy faster than if you try to fill in the blank for what he's feeling rather than seeking to draw that out. Yeah. And I think that's where, asking questions are great. Maybe tapping into, we like to say I statements, right? Yeah. I feel this way rather than, you always, those kind of statements really create distance in the relationship rather than connection. Yeah. I think as you work through that process, for a lot of guys, we default to the fixer mode, right? Like, how can I just fix it, right? And yet, I think oftentimes for guys, we need to be in that place of how do I listen more rather than just try to fix in that sense, in terms of our spouses and what's going on there. So, yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to have more questions about that later, so stay tuned. Get excited, Noel. All right. Liz, I'm going to check in with you real quick to see what's going on in the chat box. Any questions out there for Noel?
We've got a lot of spouses sharing their LinkedIn profiles in here, and I know a lot of us are back here nodding our heads, and I'm personally feverishly writing things down, everything from invest versus consume when it comes to toys to I'm so glad my husband's not the only one who's a fixer because he defaults to that, and it's like, what? We do have a question in the Q&A box, and it comes from Alyssa. And she says, growing up as a military brat, the transition into becoming a military spouse was harder than I thought it would be. What would you say is the best way to support your spouse without pushing the bias of your one-sided experience on them?
That's a good question. I think part of this is identity, right? That transition, the one who's active and, has that kind of purpose and meaning. It seems like, they kind of accelerate forward, and the one who's like, I'm along for the ride, it's tapping into what is meaning and purpose for you. I've just found that over and over again for spouses who aren't necessarily, there are the dual active component of that where you're both military, but for so many, I think they oftentimes, what does that purpose look like for you? What does meaning look like? What does identity look like apart from the career in the military and being a part, in that space? Which, when you find that purpose and that meaning, it takes the pressure off of, when you talk about bias, in terms of wanting to kind of lead them in one direction. I think that helps take the pressure off of feeling like you've got to push them in a certain way, where it's like, no, I'm taking more action on what I see as my purpose and meaning in life. And, this is a dynamic I see in any couple, right? So often, the one who has kind of targeted the career path, there seems to be more of that purpose and meaning, and they're like the trajectory of where I'm supposed to go. My wife, this is a very real struggle for her right now. I mean, it's like, she's very entrepreneurial, very like business minded, and yet we have 4 kids. And so that reality of that gap, she's wrestled with like, what's that purpose and meaning for me right now in my life? And really taking the time to seek that out. And the encouragement for me is like, man, this is a great time to really think about that. Right. And invest in yourself. Like, what does that look like? It might be taking some classes that, in a certain area that you want to grow in. It might be, developing something. It doesn't have to be like, well, I've got to wait until they're all out of the home. You know what I mean? Like, we can start doing that now. So that would be my answer to, is like, what is your purpose, your meaning in the space of being in a military environment? How are you making that investment in you?
I like that. Liz, is there anything else that we can hit on right now, or we can keep going into some more questions on my end?
We did have another one in the chat box, and I asked her to put it in the Q&A. I think she just did. Jennifer wanted to know, where do you go? Do you have any of your favorite marriage books that you think would be particularly good for a military family to read?
Absolutely, I do. Let me start with this one. It's called How We Love, and it's by, last name is Merkovich, and it's a phenomenal book. It's a little bit deeper, but the premise of it is looking at perspective of your childhood and how your childhood impacts the decision of picking a partner, and even the way you work together in the relationship. And my gosh, it's like light bulbs go off. And really the fundamental aspect of it is that the way we felt loved, comforted as a child, oftentimes has direct correlation to the way we pick our partner and the way that we show up in the relationship. Some of us are avoiders, some of us are pursuers, like all of those things, kind of that dynamic comes out. So if you're looking for something that takes you a little bit deeper, beyond just like, hey, here's how you have great communication, to me, that's a great book in terms of what it provides. Another one is, it's the 10 Lessons to Transform Your Marriage. The authors are the Gottmans, and many of them probably know him and his wife. They're out of Seattle. They created this thing called, they've done tons of research around this. And actually kind of his claim to fame is 27 seconds. He can evaluate a couple and determine whether or not they're going to get divorced. And he has like a 92% accuracy just watching their interactions. And anyway, so this book is all about like what he's seen. He calls it the Love Lab, where he'll bring couples in. And it's like almost like a research project on these couples. For years, he's been doing this. And the findings of that have come out in his book called 10 Lessons to Transform Your Marriage. It's an incredible book. It's really, really good. So there's many more I could add. Getting the love you want. That's another one. It's a great book in terms of looking at, your partner and understanding your personality differences, which is, we all have that, right? Opposites attract, and then we attack. We've heard that statement 100 times. This one helps dispel that. It's like, differences are true and they're there, but that doesn't mean that we have to go and default to attack, right? They actually can be a strength. Like, how does our differences, our personality differences, create a strength and a bond in our relationship that sometimes we see it as a weakness, or we see it as an issue.
Yeah. In regards to books, I know a lot of us, well, I can't say a lot of us. For me, it's hard to read right now because I have little ones at home, so it's easier for a podcast. Are there any podcasts out there that you know of, or
Yeah.
that you can throw out there?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that we've been working on for some time now is I've interviewed like all those folks that I just mentioned. I've had a chance to interview them and create podcasts around their core message, their books, and all that kind of stuff. And we've compiled that all together in this online resource library. And we're going to give it to you guys for free. Like anyone that's on the chat, you just go to bit.ly. I think we put bit.ly US or bit.ly/USO-connection,
Okay.
and it will pull it up. And then there's a, I think the password. Oh yeah, the password is.
Liz will put it in the
USO
chat box.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. Look at that. Perfect.
See, if you join live, you get all the fun things behind the scenes. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have like tons of interviews from parenting to marriage to wellness, trauma. Like, yeah, a lot of different resources in that.
And I'll say the website one more time just for the viewers who are viewing after the fact. It's bit.ly/USO-connection. And then the code is USO connection, all uppercase. Great. Excellent. Thank you for that. That's exciting. We'll have to check that out. And then earlier on in the conversation, you were talking about date nights. So can you tell us a little bit about how we can create creative date nights right now? And especially when it's hard to kind of get out, how do you do date nights when there's kids at home? Especially for you. What are you guys doing with 4 kids?
That's a really good question. Well, yeah, I would love to. I have actually two date ideas. One that is pretty conservative and I wouldn't say boring, but it's traditional. And then one that's a little bit more spicy, right? So if that's okay, I'll share both of them.
Please, yeah.
What that looks like. So one that is a favorite of mine. It's kind of basically like my wife and I, because we all default to the dinner and the movie, right? Like that's when we're in, especially during this time, it's like, oh gosh, not another movie. Like how many Netflix can you go through, right? As a couple. And not that that's not bad because you're still spending that quality time, but are you actually learning together? Are you growing together? Are you creating connection? So one date night idea that we've had is basically you both think about something that you're passionate about, a hobby that you're interested in, right? And you pick that, and then you get to guide your partner, your spouse, through that hobby, that passion that you have, right? So my passion, hobby, I'm not very good at it, but is guitar. I love playing the guitar.
Fun fact.
And so, it's like a night where I got to be the guide to kind of sharing with Carissa, like here's how, music and all that kind of stuff, taking her through that process, right? So that's the first part of the date. And then the second part is moving towards, well, actually, no, I'm sorry. That is the creative part of the date. The second part of the date is taking that experience. So then you switch roles, right? So I would be the guide for the guitar. It could be like my passion's painting, right? And I'm going to teach you how to paint. And then on the back end of that, the conversation is, our personalities, we're different in this sense, even our hobbies that we pick, but how is that a strength in our relationship? And really have that intentional conversation around it. I think that can highlight the activity that you just did. You can have a great conversation around our personality differences and why that's a strength in our relationship. So that's one date idea that's doesn't require you to go out. You don't need to, you can do it from home, generally speaking. Yeah. So that's the more traditional one.
Okay. I love that.
Here's a more adventurous one, I guess they call it that, right?
Hello.
So I'm curious, Nicole, do you guys have code words in your relationship?
No, I don't think. Not that I can think of.
Okay, all right. So this one
out there, chime in the chat box, I guess.
Yeah, does anyone have code words in your relationship?
Okay, yes. Okay, good. There's some others out there. I'm like,
awesome. All right, so this date night is all about creating your code words, right? So like, I'll just list off a couple of them. Like, I'd like your help. do you have a code word for that? You know what I mean? Like you're in a group and you don't want to be like, hey, I need your help. You throw out the code word, right? Or it's, you're sexy. Like, is there a code word for that? So your kids don't have to, well, actually, I think it's a good thing that your kids hear you say that your spouse is sexy. But, there's different things. Let's
This
talk.
is fun. Keep going.
Let's talk in private. Do you have a code word for that one? Right? You know what I mean? Like, so there's a number of things that you can create code words around. It's a fun exercise to think about it. And again, like, I'm not just making this stuff up. We've actually created date nights that are part of that online library where you can go and it has all of this information for you to work through, which is fun. But so that's the first part of the date night, is to create these code words together. So you have like this, your secret language together, which is always fun.
I love that.
Here's my favorite. There's the, can we leave, right? So I'm more the introvert. My wife's very much the extrovert.
Yeah.
So it's like, rather than say, can we leave? Like, what's the code word behind that, right?
Are you allowed to share it, or would all your friends know that you've said that word before when you're hanging out at their house?
Right, exactly. Exactly. So that's the first phase of the date night. And then the second phase, this is where it gets way more romantic, right? Is to do basically nonverbal touch, right? So connecting through touch. And there's some great, I want to throw this out there. There's a great website. It's called Melt Massage, and it's PG. So there's no like weirdness in it, right? They have a free online class where you can go through and it teaches you massage. And I think the coolest part about this is that there's no verbal aspect to it. It's just total touch, and you're having a chance to massage. And I think it's just such a powerful thing, from a relationship standpoint. And I've worked with a lot of couples when they're in conflict. Sometimes the more they talk, the more hurt happens, right? But creating touch and connection, that doesn't necessarily have to be through verbal. So that nonverbal aspect of it can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like with the date night stuff too, it's kind of one of those things, and kind of, if you could walk us through this, if there is something more than where I'm trying to go with this, but like, how did you fall in love with your spouse in the first place? And that was through dating, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
How can you get back to that, where you fell in love, where you got that excitement? I feel like that's so important.
Yeah, you're so right, Nicole. And I think when you think about when you were dating, you think about the fact that there was spontaneity, there was adventure, there was this aspect of newness, right? It was like, what's the new thing I'm going to learn about you, or the new experience that we're going to have together, which are all really, really good things. And that's what creates that love and connection. But then you get in a relationship, a long-term relationship, you start having kids, and it moves from spontaneity, adventure, all those things, to predictability. You know what I mean?
Routine, right, schedules.
Which of those are important pieces, right? Creating safety in a relationship requires predictability and some of those other things, but they're almost working against each other, right? Yeah. Like, if you don't have that spontaneity and adventure and you've lost that, it can become, we're just going through the motions, right? We're more like roommates at this point. So date night, to me, it's an invitation to take on spontaneity, adventure, new experiences that can shake things up, where that doesn't seem what's the word I'm looking for? Predictability is, I guess, what we're looking for, right? Yeah. In a relationship. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So, and Liz, I see some more questions in the Q&A. Do we want to get to those, or I can go all day with questions? So,
sure thing. These three have been sitting here, and I think they are good questions to ask. The first is, can the Stronger Families program be offered online via Zoom?
Yes. Yeah. So we pivoted, and the USO has been supportive of this, where we've been doing webinars around different topics. Like transition is a topic that we've been doing. There's been, love styles, communication, conflict. So yes, that is absolutely something that is available.
Cool.
Great, thank you. The next one is, what's your advice to stay connected during deployment?
Yes. So one of the things that we've incorporated into every single one of the date nights that we've put together is a deployed version of it. So you can actually do these date nights deployed, where obviously it's connected through technology, but it's taking the concepts, which I think are the part that creates the connection, and then repackaging it in a digital way where you can continue to work through that. So to me, that's one of the most practical ways. Like, you're deployed, I think we all, run into that thing of like, hey, when we connect via Zoom for deployment, it's about the kids, it's about the family, it's like catching up, but there's not necessarily the intentionality to say, well, how are we being fun and the spontaneity and all that aspect of the relationship, the newness aspect. So the date nights is a big one, I think is huge to connect with. I think the other piece is just, some of the skill sets that we teach within Oxygen. We've found couples have used that during deployment that really helps move from talking about surface level issues to the deeper issues that need to be dealt with, not to just bury them, but actually to walk in empathy towards them, right? So like, I'll give you an example of one that I just recently heard about, just the spouse who's deployed calling and knowing that their spouse is dealing with kids now and all those new realities. For him, it was tapping into that empathy of like, man, I know this is so hard right now for you. Like, I just want you to know that I'm here for you. Even though I'm not physically here, I'm mentally and emotionally here for you, knowing what you're going through. Like, to me, those are the moments where you create that bond and connection, even though you're miles and miles away from each other. It's such a huge piece that I think gets missed because of just the pace and dealing with that. So yeah,
the communication piece. I mean, even though you're separated in long distance, it's good to hear from both sides what you're thinking, that the support's there for sure.
Absolutely. I've heard this from older couples who've been in for a long time. One of the things that they've done, and I think it's not necessarily new, but it's the impact is definitely going to be there, is that they would take time to write letters and then send them in the mail. Like, there's something about getting a handwritten letter from your significant other that expresses how much they care for you. Like, to me, that can be such a huge bond instantly by receiving that in the mail. Even though we could, fire it off by email and we could, do the Zoom, there's something about getting it in the mail that just,
I have letters that my husband wrote me when he was deployed, and that's something I'll have for the rest of my life. Like, I could not part with those. Those are so special to me. So yeah, absolutely love that. Liz, anything else?
Yes, I was just going to say, I have to agree. Noel, my husband just got home from a year in Iraq, and it was hands down the hardest year of our lives for many reasons. But one of the things that I will forever cherish is he would write me letters, and he actually did that. He articulated something he's not good at articulating in person, which was how hard it is to be a mom and a stay-at-home mom and a work-from-home mom. And then the pandemic hit, and I got a letter from him being like, I can't even imagine how hard this is for you, but you're the best mom in the world. And just to read that, woo, goosebumps. So you're hitting a chord here. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's sitting here getting choked up. Back to the Q&A box. Our last question in here says, can the Date Night in a Box series please come back?
Can it please come back? Is that was the question? That
was the question, yes. Can Date Night in a Box come back?
Yes. Yeah, we produced a ton of them, and we took like a pause, and we're in the process of getting that geared back up. I think we have almost like 2 years. So if you were to do this once a month, you could go for 2 years with new creative dates. So yes, it is interestingly enough, because I've written the curriculum for Oxygen. These date nights are hard. They take a lot of I don't know. I think it's tapping into something very different, and you're constantly having to think about new creative ways. One thing I'll offer, just throw out there, similar to the date night thing. I mean, we've all heard of love languages, right? Like, what's my partner's love language? How do I meet that love language? I would say that if you can tap into that piece right there, and we've created this thing where every single week you get an email like if my wife is words of affirmation. So every week I get an email that practically guides me through how can I meet that love language of her, right? And that's like 52 additional weeks of creative date night aspect, but you're tapping into their love language. And it's usually around some type of activity. You're doing some sweet thing that is going to connect with their love language. My gosh, I am convinced if couples would just do 52 weeks of that, it would change their relationship. You wouldn't need to do counseling and all that kind of stuff. Just every single week, intentionally love your partner how they were designed to be loved. And you'll be in a different place in a year.
How do we get that email?
Yeah, so it's actually part of that. It's a part of when they sign up for the online membership.
Okay.
You'll see that it's called 52 Love Style Challenge. Okay. They click on it. They just put in their name, their email, and then their partner's love language. So if you don't know what your partner's love language is, or you don't know what your love language is, I think I saw it in chat. It's just 5lovelanguages.com. It's a free quiz. Just take it. But the important thing is to plug that in, and then every single week you get an email with a practical way to love them. So
I love it. So then it's in front of you, and it's a simple reminder because our lives can get crazy, and it's nice to take that moment to, hone in on that and say, okay, I'm going to do that this week.
And the best part is that you can totally take credit for it. You can be like, yeah, this was all on me. For 52 weeks, I come up with creative ways to love you, and you don't even need to tell the source. You just take credit for it.
So cool. Thank you. See, we're all learning something new today. We're going to be amazing spouses. Speaking of date nights, and this is something that, I have tons of board games in our closet right now, and I feel like we haven't been playing a lot of them, but are there any like fun board games that you would recommend for couples to maybe pull out and play together for one of the date nights, or card games or something like that, just to mix things up?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the first one I'm going to share with you, I have not done this yet, but it recently came to me. Some people shared it and they're like, "No, this is like the coolest thing ever." And my wife and I are like, we need to do it. So it's called the Adventure Challenge, and it's called Couples Edition. And it's like, it's incredible. Like they've put together one of the best games I think I've seen out there in terms of couples kind of experiencing things together. So I haven't done it, so I'll just throw that out there, but it's pretty cool. Here's what I would say about the board game thing for couples. I mean, you could take any of the typical ones, like for us, Scrabble, Jenga, categories, like those are all like household names that we have sitting around. But then put a spin on it, right? So like think about, let's just take categories for a second, right? You're coming up with creative words that, and how does that relate to your relationship, right? That you can make it meaningful to your relationship by using these board games to connect in what you're doing. So Jenga is a great one, from a perspective of laughing together and having fun. Like, I don't think I've ever played Jenga and I didn't laugh. I mean, it's just part of that experience, right? So those are some of the ones that I would say kind of repurpose them, but in light of your relationship, like how can you incorporate that into it?
I love that, because what I was going to say is that we've been playing a lot of Rummy, and it's just fun just to kind of just hang out. And, maybe we've been talking all day, at work, but this way we're just kind of together and we can just play cards and laugh and just have a good time. But I like where you're like, with the categories, you mix it up a little bit, or even the Jenga, you could turn it into a couples game where, when you pull out the thing, you read, like, you guys could write something on there, like say something nice about your spouse, or tell me a time, and you could totally just make up your own version of a Jenga game. So,
so true.
Time, win, whatever. So
yeah, and I think the value of this, Nicole, is whenever generally speaking, depending on the game, I guess this is not totally true, because some games you get in incredible fights, like Settlers of Catan, we don't even play that game anymore in our home because it just instantly, man, people are arguing about it. It's but for the most part, like Jenga and those kind of things, they create laughter, and I think laughter is one of the greatest things that couples can experience together. I mean, from a scientific standpoint, when laughter happens, it's decreasing the stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, all those things, and it's increasing serotonin, like the happy chemical. So all that's happening and you don't even know it. You're just laughing, and yet your brain is firing on a whole different level. I think it's a missing element to many couples. They stop laughing. They stop having fun together, and literally chemically, there's an imbalance there that pretty easy to do, right? I mean, like play Jenga and try not to laugh. You know what I mean? Like it's going to happen. So little things like that, I think, can go so far in a relationship.
It's so important. And I mean, it sounds so simple, but it's like, no, it's like, just think of the last time you had a really good belly laugh and how great you felt.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank
Yeah.
you for that reminder. Liz, anything, I just want to make sure, because we're running close to time, but I have a couple questions, but wanted to check, is there anything out there in the Q&A?
We do have a good question in the question box. Zinnia wants to know, how do parents, especially when one is on active duty, communicate the needs of their special needs child without getting frustrated with each other?
So the question is, how do I communicate when my spouse is deployed, or just I couldn't remember if I heard deployment in that.
I will read it again for you. No,
Okay.
One active duty spouse, so the parents, and one is on active duty. How do the parents communicate the needs of their special needs child without getting frustrated with each other? Maybe finding that balance. Maybe one parent feels that they do more with the special needs child. How do they communicate and find balance with that?
Got it. Yes. Oh, this is so good. Yeah, I mean, I think in the context of special needs, there's an element of making sure that the caregiver, and usually there's one spouse that's taking more of an active role in that. I mean, you're both invested, no doubt, but one's taking more active role. What we've seen is just the absolute need for that caregiver to really make sure that they're building in time self-care for them, because I mean, when you're stretched and you've been kind of emptied of yourself and giving, oftentimes that you have no more recourse when it comes to your spouse, your significant other. And so you're drawing on emptiness in that sense, if I can use that analogy. And so creating that self-care where you're giving yourself time to, rest and replenish and all those kind of things. To me, that's one of the most significant pieces of creating good communication when it comes to special needs. I think what I've already kind of mentioned today is just, when it comes to actual communication, it's interesting. 7% of what we say actually makes up the communication. Like 7% are the words. It's the vocal tone, it's the nonverbals, it's all of that. That actually is the bigger pie of our communication. And then what I see with so many couples is that they might have the right words coming out, but their body language is really not sharing the same message, and they're super upset, and you can see it, you can feel it, and yet they're like, I said the right things, you know what I mean? Like the words were right. So to me, it's like that check on that. And that again comes from, where are you at? Like, are you getting that personal care? Are you in a sense of like feeling, I don't think we ever get to the place when we have kids, like, man, I feel refreshed. I mean, like we're always in that status of like, man, I need to continue to push forward. But if you're really fatigued and tired and you're not getting those breaks, I can tell you probably your body language is by default just going to show up differently in those conversations with your significant other. So, yeah.
Important. And as we're almost at time, what from the many years of experience and with all the military couples, I guess this is kind of a big question, but what is the key to a happy marriage? Like, I know you said laughter and, strong communication, but to kind of end it on a happy note, what can we do to say, these are the things that we should be working on with our spouse?
I am so glad that we're ending on this question. I was hoping that it would come up.
Yeah.
And I hope I don't disappoint in my answer here, because here's the thing. In all the years that I've been invested in this marriage space and worked with thousands of couples, I can tell you it comes down to simply this. This is not about the big things that happen in your relationship. It's about the daily little things that take place. And that's like great news if you think about it, because it doesn't have anything to do with, are we compatible? Do we come from, family of origins where there wasn't divorce? Like all those big ticket things that we sometimes think are the reasons why successful marriages or happy marriages are created. That's not in the equation. Literally the truth of it is the ones that are successful and happy, they're doing the little intentional things daily, which adds up to a very big thing, right? So it's hey, once a week, I'm going to, do a quick little love language thing. And I'm going to make sure my spouse knows that I love them, or I'm going to send them that little note. These are not grand gesture things. You don't need to go like, not that you shouldn't, but you don't need to go across the country and do a big old romantic getaway. Those things can help, but it's every single day. Like, am I thinking about how I can create connection, how I can serve, how I can give back to my partner, be that investor. When you do that, I'm telling you, you're going to have a happy marriage. You're going to have a happy, successful relationship. It really comes down to that intentionality.
I love it. Thank you. That's huge. I mean, that's absolutely huge. So, no, thank you so much for that. And
Great.
how can the spouses joining us now, and for those watching later, how can we keep in touch with what you're doing with Stronger Families? How do we keep connected?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly there's the social media aspect of it. I think, where we're at right now is a lot of it's on the installations, right? So we're working with Command, we're working with the chaplains on these events and those kind of things to get connected on that level. But I think, there's certainly social media, our website, we post events that are happening, webinars that are taking place. My wife and I just did a webinar that we had a mixologist come on as part of the date night, and he whipped up all these drinks, and it was really fun. It was great. And then we had this topic that we did. So connecting with us on that level, we'd love to have you join us.
Well, thank you so much for all of this. It's been a pleasure talking about all of this with you. I'm sure we can all walk away better people. So thank you for that, helping our marriages. And I'm going to give everybody a heads up on upcoming events that we have going on in the next couple of days. So next week, wow. So on the 28th, we have a Discovering Your Spark workshop with Brittany Bacher. So check the links in the chat box for that. And we also have next week, and this is a special edition, we just added this, is a Homeschooling 101 Coffee Connection Live with military spouse Jessica Rudd. So make sure you check that out, because I know a lot of us are like, homeschool, what? So they're learning a lot more about that. And then we also have a Coffee Connection Live planned for August 6th with Heidi Murkoff, the author of the What to Expect series. So bring all of your questions. Heidi will answer all of them that we have. And that is from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. And always make sure to check out our USO Military Virtual Programming website. It is up and running. So this is with all of our featured entertainment guests that we've had throughout the past couple of weeks. Check that out at uso.org/MVP. There's more. Make sure to check our USO Military Spouse Facebook group to see what we have going on in the military spouse world if you haven't joined that yet. And of course, always check your local USO Facebook page to see what's going on in your community and get connected with what they're up to as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you. Noel, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the summer, and everyone stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.